Big Bad Texas is too scared to play the Big 12. Yes, the Longhorns are backing out of a home-and-home against a Big 12 team. I'll tell you who it is. I'll tell you why it's happening and why this should be a warning shot of sorts to the Big 12 that you need to pay attention to. All right. How often does the Big 12 get crap for not playing anybody, not having wins against the SEC, Big 10? Texas Tech is the latest that's getting a ton of heat for it with its schedule this year, which, I mean, fair enough. It's definitely soft on paper. And a big part of that is out of their control because it's the Big 12 schedule and there's just not a lot that is going on with that. We'll see. Could change. Big 12 typically pretty topsy-turvy outside of the top even this past year. So maybe that will change. But for right now, I mean, they're missing BYU. It doesn't look like there's a ton of meat on that bone. Their non-conference schedule is Abilene Christian, Oregon State, and Sam Houston State. That they do have control over. However, it takes two to tango. You do have to have somebody else that's willing to play you. And that's what's frustrating for the Big 12 now. It is difficult to get games against some of the big brands, especially if you're trying to get like a home and home. I guess at this point, even if it's going to be like a neutral site or something like that, you just go do it. But, man, when the Big 12 does actually get some of these games, they do not always go poorly, right? I mean, TCU beat Michigan in the college football playoff. Arizona State was a 4th and 13 stop away from beating Texas and lost in double overtime in a college football playoff quarterfinal, right? They were that close to beating Texas. And speaking of Texas and speaking of Arizona State, it would be great if Big 12 teams could actually have a legitimate crack at big brands and big teams like Texas in their non-conference schedule. But the Longhorns are making that virtually impossible here, okay? Because here's the news. Texas announced this week it's backing out of a non-con scheduling agreement with Arizona State. The games were scheduled for 2031 and 2032. Arizona State is going to have to backfill the games now with Stanford, which is fine. But especially in this day and age, the NIL era, the transfer portal era, that's not Stanford's bag, baby. The days of David Shaw and Andrew Luck and Toby Gerhart, long gone. This is not your older brother Stanford, okay? That's not going to be a game with nearly as much teeth to it. So it's going to hurt Arizona State, but not as much as some schools because Arizona State has actually been more aggressive with their non-con scheduling than basically anybody else in the Big 12. I mean, they've got Texas A&M this year. They're in College Station. They got to go to Kyle Field this year, and then they get a return trip next season to Tempe. So they've got A&M on the schedule. They've also got LSU on the schedule for 29 and 30 for now. Because the reason Texas is backing out of this game, and it sends a big message to the Big 12, by the way, the reason Texas is backing out of this game, well, there's one clear reason. Please do subscribe to the channel, like the video as I push to 35K subscribers. Really helps if you do subscribe, if you watch a lot. It's all about the SEC going to this 9-game conference schedule, right? That's what you're going to get from Texas on this. They don't want to schedule an extra potential loss, frankly, when they're going to have to play 9 games against the toughest conference in the country, which, right now I feel like the Big Ten has earned me throwing up those air quotes right now for the SEC. We shall see. But 3 straight natties for the Big Ten has it at least in question here. The SEC, when this discussion started about 9 conference games, would have said, wow, we are definitively the best conference in the country. And because of that, we're not going to play good non-conference games if we have to play an extra game. We're getting more beat up in the SEC, and we've got 9 of those. That's their general attitude. And so what it translates to, Texas is scared of Arizona State. They don't want another potential loss on the schedule. They touched the stove once. They got burned, not as much as they could have. They almost burned the house down, but they still did get burned by touching the stove, and they said, we're not doing that again. I'm not giving the ghost of Cam Scatterbo another shot here. Look, if they thought Arizona State wasn't a real threat, which the way most Texas fans talk about the Big 12, you would certainly anticipate that's what they would say. But if they thought Arizona State wasn't a real threat, they wouldn't back out of the game because who cares? But there's that. ASU is a real threat that could beat them when they're already having to play 9 conference games. And then there's also Arizona State is a little bit different than other games that are scheduled right now for Texas against Ohio State or Notre Dame, where, yeah, you might be able to still survive that and you'll get credit for like a quality loss, quote unquote, whereas you might not because of the perception of the Big 12 if it's Arizona State. So there is that caveat and frustration to it, I think, if you're a Big 12 fan. But if you're an Arizona State fan, I mean, this sucks, but I would wear this like a badge of honor, man. I would wear this like a badge of honor. You backed Texas into a corner to cower and go run and hide. Cam Scadaboo did this to them. That 16-point fourth quarter in the Peach Bowl did this to Texas. They do not want any part of this. All right. Now, for the Big 12, this is a big message for the rest of the league that it needs to adhere to, right? It's going to be harder and harder to schedule games like this. It is moving the opposite direction of getting more cracks at bigger brands, which places more emphasis on the playoff games, which is why it sucks so much that Texas Tech lost the way that it did to Oregon, all right, and all of that. But the SEC now going to 9 games in conference, they're not going to want to schedule more of these games. You do have that Big 12 stigma attached to you, so it's going to be harder to get games against some of those bigger opponents. Kudos to Arizona State for already having it done with A&M and LSU, but I mean, I hope LSU holds on to the game. Part of what's going on here is not only is the SEC added another game, but they're starting to realize probably, at least they should be, tide has shifted a bit. Big Ten may start getting more benefit of the doubt when it comes to at-large. You don't need to be throwing more losses on your resume because the Big Ten may be getting more of the preferential treatment that typically used to be yours and that you felt like was your birthright. So they're going to hunker down and just rely on playing each other, flying that SEC flag, wearing those belts that have every single logo, the SEC team, every SEC team on it. And they're going to just continue to push the message that Lord Sankey was pushing last offseason, which is just, hey, we'll find all these metrics that say we're the best and bring it all in-house and only play us and not even give you a chance to really debate it much outside of that. You're just going to have to take our word for it and take the previous 20 years before the last 3 of college football for it. That's going to be the general idea. So when you get a game against a huge brand, now I know these are not SEC teams, but still, Notre Dame comes to Provo, better win that, better perform well. Oregon comes to Stillwater, it's tough for me to say, hey, you better win that, but at least have a nice showing. Maybe don't give up 69 points this time around. These are important games. It heightens the importance of them because you're seeing now how it's going to get tougher and tougher to do this, especially with the SEC now that they are going to 9 conference games and being pretty whiny in the process about everything that's happening right now. So, look, the playoff games are the most important thing. That's the only real way to earn some legitimate currency out there. But you can do it to an extent in a non-conference game against one of these teams if you can get the game. But they're probably going to be backing out more and more. And the other thing you have to worry about is that the SEC has already floated out there with all the problems and enforcement with NIL, and the SEC has already floated the idea that maybe we'll just bring it all in-house and only play games against the SEC the entire year, and then we can make our own rules and compete against each other that way and silo it all off. Click here to learn more about how realistic that possibility actually is.